It's my joy to be here today, and we've been hatching this plan for a very long time during the pandemic where people were staying at home, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to be able to transport people to Binkhaven and talk about a little bit about the current place of Binkhaven and some of its history. Today's event is part of our webinar conversation series in which we examine where contemporary craft and folk art are today and how artists and communities carry these traditions and skills into the future. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce you to our feature speaker. Elliot Taillon has had a lifelong passion for art history, and all manner of collections. Having previously worked in a luxury home goods in New York City, he stumbled across Binkhaven while back visiting family in the village of Ephraim, Wisconsin. With its two staubburs and rich decorative painting, he immediately knew that Binkhaven was a special place that he had to help preserve. He has spent the last 3 years doing exactly that, turning Binkhaven into a vacation rental to both fund restorations and expose people to the fairy tale cottage that takes Nordic revival to its extreme. As part of this, he's also worked to rebuild the decorative art collection within, capturing a moment in rosemaling history. He has combined his affinity for art history with his experience in luxury interiors to preserve original details while updating Binkhaven for modern lifestyles, allowing visitors to peek into the past at a time when rosemaling was just starting to blossom in America. So now I'm going to pitch it over to you, Elliot.
Hello, everybody. It is lovely to be here today. Some of you might already know me from my Instagram. I've shared restoring the house for the past 3 years now. It's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to meet a lot of you digitally, but I haven't gotten down to the Vesterheim as much as I would like to. But anyways, I bought this in 2018. I am only the second owner. This was originally built by Dean and Marilyn Madden. Starting in 1961. It took about a decade to build and paint it all here. They built it as their summer cottage and lived in it really quite regularly until I bought it in 2018. So it was in very good cared for condition, albeit 60 years does a number to an old wooden cottage. What really makes the house special is all of the rosemalin, like you can see behind me. This was all painted by Sigmund Aarseth. Starting in 1966 and continuing until like about 1973-ish. So this lecture is going to be a little bit different than how some of the other ones have, because we're going to go through so many rooms. I had to pre-record the tour just so we didn't have to run into rain while talking outside or anything like that. So the first video is kind of long. It's a little over 20 minutes where we're going to look at the main house. And then we're going to take a little break, have some questions. I can answer anything. And then we're going to look at these two staubburs, which you see on your screen right now. I'm in the littler of the two as we speak. And then after that, we're going to look at a few of the pieces of early furniture that were made for the house, because a lot of the collection here is kind of redundant to what the Vesterheim has on display, because Dr. Mary Nelson was actually good friends with Dean Madden, of course. So they kind of collected the same exact thing. But before he knew Dr. Mary Nelson, Dean created some quite unique Nordic revival pieces that I think are a wonderful look back into the time period. So we'll look at those, and that should probably take up most of the hour. So why don't we start our video here? Okay, so I just hopped out of this little building here, but we're gonna come back to these in a minute. I wanna start with the main house over here. So most of what I want to show you is inside. I already filmed the interior portion of this during the home and garden walk when everything was really prim and proper inside. But I want to do a quick tour around the exterior and talk to you about kind of how this came to be. So it was built in 1961. The main body of it is the upper floor and the first floor kind of central cube. It was meant to mimic a staubbur. You can kind of see these like arched or sort of arched front windows, which further bring in that motif. Inside, there is an open floor plan, which is really quite American. An angle nook fireplace of sorts, and some other Nordic elements that were kind of all clapped together to make what I call Nordic revival architecture. This really does not copy anything you ever find in Norway.
but it is pulling a lot of direct inspiration from Norwegian styles and things like that. Anyways, we're gonna take a little walk around here. This attachment on the back is the sunroom. This was built with carved panels that were originally intended for the Sawbuck in South Dakota. I am not entirely sure why they didn't use them there, but for whatever reason, Dean had the opportunity to buy them in 1969, and so he did, and he built this lovely addition, this sunroom. Along with the sunroom, this upstairs balcony here was enclosed into the bedrooms. It was necessary in order to get the roof on the sunroom. And then over here we have the dining room. This was originally a screened-in porch made into a room in 1969. And then walking back to the front, the final addition on the house was the front stoop in 1971, again with carved pieces from Norway. And then inside there we have got a little bench that I'm going to talk to you about later with the PowerPoint that I put together. Okay, so coming inside here, we are first greeted by this really fun doorbell that everyone always comments on. It spins around a little bit. I'm actually not sure if it is Norwegian, but I do know it came from somewhere in Europe in the late 1950s. Anyways, coming inside here. So as I was saying, this is an open floor plan, which is really quite revolutionary for the time. So the kitchen, living, and dining were all right here. The dining table went in front of the fireplace. You can actually still see the light beam, which would have lit up the dining table before the dining room was added. So we'll start right here in the living room. I'll start back here in the fireplace. So the fireplace is another really interesting product of the time. It is modeled after 18th century Engelnook fireplaces, so it is really, really big. But to fill the space, they added an indoor grill, which was just what every 1960s cottage needed. The mantle is actually one of the very, very few things, actually I think it might be one of the only things I changed from the original. The panels that were on it were separate panels that were attached to the front, but being right over the fireplace, they did not really stand the test of time very well. So Karen Hankey came last year and marbled it for me, which I just love. I really love this Nordic marbling. I got a little bit of rosemaling. That bigger bowl is by Sigmund, as are these beams. These beams are painted by him on his first trip here in 1966. I want to share with you this painting on top of the mantle because this is one of my favorites in the collection. So this is the Viking ship that Norway sent the World Fair in 1893. I think it was literally called the Viking. It was a copy of a ancient Viking ship that had just been discovered. But we see it here with the American flag on it. I believe this is when it was shipped down to New Orleans where it wintered after the fair in Chicago, and then it went back up to Chicago where it was put on display at the Field Museum. But anyways, it is just a really, really lovely painting, and it's great to have a color image of the Viking ship because really there are just not many color images of it. So coming around to the rest of the living room, we've got a couple Kuba stools, a little bit of rosemalling above the sofa. The table in the middle is actually the bench for what was the original dining table in front of the fireplace. And the table in the back there is modeled after a sugar chest, a Norwegian sugar chest, and once held the record player, which would have gone into the built-in sound system, which is of course long defunct now. But the Kuba stools, the one on the right here is a antique from Norway that was shipped here. And the one on the left, I'm sure many of you will recognize, as this is identical to one that is on display at the Vesterheim. This was actually ordered at the same time as the one that you have there. Dr. Maren Nelson Dean and Sigmund, the three of them together, went to meet the carver and order these Kuba stools. So this is the exact same vintage of, you know, these really beautiful Landsverk Kuba stools. So also in this room is a Nils Ellingsgaard trunk. I believe the trunk itself is probably like early 19th century. It's got this really great trapezoidal shape. And then it is, of course, rosemaled with the rosemaling, the Hollandal style rosemaling that Nils was so well known for. I particularly love this motif on the edge with the flowers spiraling down. I think that is just a really effective way to fill the space. You know, I'll just kind of show you guys this because this is a really great piece of rosemalling. All right, so let's go into, oh, here's also a built-in bookcase by Sigmund with kind of a more modern interpretation of rosemalling on it and these really kind of bright, happy colors. It's a really cute piece. All right, so let's go into the kitchen here. So the kitchen had a little bit of a remodel in the early 1990s. That may not have been the best thing to have had happen, unfortunately. But we do have the original cabinetry from 1966. I actually have the original stove too. It is getting restored. And we're gonna get new countertops and new floors. And then over here, there was meant to be a kitchen island. But when I bought the house, there was actually a wall there that I took out to bring it back to the original floor plan. So I've got to rebuild the kitchen island there. We also have a bathroom back here. This is actually the main bathroom. It's the only shower in the house. And inside the bathroom is this mirror, which some of you may recognize. Sigmund Aarseth wrote a book on rosemalling in 1976. That's a very common book. This is actually a photo of this mirror is the cover page. And there's actually a couple pictures of Binkhaven in that book as well. And then we got a lovely, some door paintings. And now let's go into the sunroom and then we'll come back inside and look at the dining room and go upstairs. So the sunroom is, of course, an addition. It has another ceiling that Sigmund painted. Here we can kind of get a better view if we go over here. This one has not aged as well as the others just because this is not a tempered room. And there's actually also a fire in this room a long time ago. Right here on this table, a candle burned too low, but very fortunately, Norma Wainsness rosemaled this table, I think probably about 2000, 2001, to blend it on in with the ceiling and fix the scorch marks on the table. Furniture set itself is the 1981 Stav Oak collection from North Carolina. It is made out of old Jimmy Bean whiskey barrels, which is really fun. I just had it reupholstered this year. Then also in here, we've got a couple more pieces of rosemalling, of course. I collect fossils, so we're actually on what used to be a Silurian reef here. So these are fossils that I find on the property. It's one of my favorite things to do. Anyways, let's go on into the dining room because there's some really great pieces of art in the dining room. So starting with, we've got these corner cabinets. These were custom made for the room, of course. There is a pair of them. They are painted by Sigmund and they match this really, really lovely and very large china cabinet that was made for the spot. And it now houses a little collection of Royal Copenhagen china. These great, these are actually old restaurant ware with the Viking ship. But they're very fun. Oh, and my little mouse. Also in here, we have got this really wonderful clock. So this clock is by Nils Ellingsgaard. This was actually purchased in 1971 on the first trip the Vesterheim took to Norway. This was one of Dean's many souvenirs that he bought. So this was painted in Nils's studio in Norway and then shipped here. The clock itself is actually just a standard Tempest Fuget, which is a common brand in Europe. But of course, this one is made very special by being painted by one of the best rosemalers of the 20th century. Yeah. Also, let's see, what else do we have in here? Oh, the dining table, of course. So the dining table is a Rom Weber Viking oak. This one predates the house. This is from 1953. This was actually ordered by Dean's father, new in 1953, and it ended up here in the house in the 1980s. It's a really great piece. It's actually kind of like iconic. It's one of the very few pieces of iconic design to have come out of the Midwest, the Viking oak collection. It's made in southern Indiana. We also have a lovely arrangement. We have a local Swedish florist who made these really great arrangements for me in some rosemalling. That's a Tyne box. Shoot, I forgot the artist on that, but it's one of the earlier gold medalists. Then we have a table setting out just for show for the home and garden walk tomorrow. The silver set is, it's not Blossom. I know it looks like the George Jensen Blossom, but it is actually one of the American copies from the early 20th century. I think that's, we also got the beams. Sigmund painted these again on his first trip to kind of be reminiscent of the Viking carvings, because he thought this room was Viking-esque and dark, because when he was here and when these were painted, this was a screened in room, and all the beams that held the roof up were stained dark, like the upper portion here that you see. Right. Okay, so coming upstairs, we've got another little collection of rosemaling. I'll give you the names of these artists real quick, but excuse me if I butcher the pronunciations. I've got a little bit of a speech impediment, and I read all these names all the time, but I don't really talk about it very often. So we've got a Rhoda Fritsch on the far right, Agnes Ryken bucket. That was actually the piece she entered in the 1969 Nordic Fest that won her gold medal. The Dragon box is by Ethel Kolheim. This Tyne box on the top is another one by Agnes Ryken. Joan Hurry in the middle and John Gunderson on the bottom. The little trunk came from Norway, Stavanger, Norway in 1958. And the porringer is by Sunhild Malkin. Sigmund also painted little quotes around the room, which is a tradition in old Norwegian cottages. I'm not going to read them all to you just in the interest of time, but I will read you this one. This is cute. It says, "Protect this home from fire and thieves," which is something they saw in an old cottage and decided to recreate it here. Okay, so coming upstairs, we've got a little collection of Nordic art books and another custom piece. So this desk was made in 1965 with the barn wood, and you'll see the heart and doll motif. I'll get a little closer. This heart and doll motif that carries throughout the property. You can also see it back here on the stairwell. But yeah, this desk was made in 1965 just for this spot, and then Sigmund came in and painted it. Then on top of it, we've got a lovely little rosemaled round box. This was from Pat Verch's collection. It's by Lily Kittelsen, who is one of the Norwegian artists who came to teach at the Vesterheim. But I just loved the unusual shape of the round box. Then we've got another fireplace up here. This one with a copper medallion of the Norwegian crest on it, made by a local artist. And just a little print on wood of 11 doll horses from a folk museum in Sweden. And then in front of me, there is everybody's favorite bed, this really adorable little built-in. It's your favorite bed until you have to make it, because getting into these little corners is quite a hassle. Anyways, we've got a Vythody on the wall, and then there's a little collection in here. There's a Barbara Hawes box on the top left, little Henning, Stavkirk, and other bits and bobs. And then around here, we have got another lovely trunk. This one was painted by Sigmund Aarseth in 1967. He used to paint quite a few of these over the winter to kind of pay his bills as a young artist. So this, I don't think many of them really made their way to America, but he did make quite a few of these. And then, of course, the ceiling. So this was painted on his very first trip over here in 1966. The base coat was all done for him in advance, but believe it or not, he painted all of this rosemalling on scaffolding in only 5 days, which really blows my mind. My video recording really doesn't do this justice, but if you go on my website, you can probably get some better photos to really see just the beauty that is this ceiling from a young Sigmund Aarseth. Because for a perspective of timing, he was actually painting here. So he started painting here in 1966. He started teaching at the Vesterheim in 1967. So he was really quite a young guy when he was over here doing all of this work. All right, so let's go into the twin room next. So there's another couple pieces of custom furniture that were then painted by Sigmund. This cute little cabinet is by Sally DeRoos when she was a really rather young rosemaler herself, and another little John Gunderson. These windows had some pretty major moisture damage, particularly these two over here, because this is where that balcony was enclosed into the bedrooms here. So we had to paint these, and then Karen Hankey marbled them, which is lovely, along with these beds, all in colors from the beams that Sigmund painted. So everything ties in just really, really well together. And then coming out, oh, of course, this door. This door here, back up, has a really interesting history. So this is actually a window prop from the Carson Perry Scott department store when they hosted the Scandinavian Fortnight in 1964. I don't know how Dean was able to buy a window prop, but he must have either paid a lot of money or done a lot of convincing, because they did let it go, and here it is made into a door. Sigmund added the Viking ceremonial objects on the top because when this was on display there, it was framed differently and the top and bottom were left unpainted. But it's really quite a funny map because it is like woefully incorrect. I mean, look at that, literally just island. It's very clearly just stencils done by a set painter, not made to actually be looked at closely. Coming in here, we've got another bathroom. So this bathroom was also in kind of rough shape when I bought it. This originally had a linoleum floor, but linoleum at this time period, of course, had asbestos in it. So we had to cut out this entire floor while working around the original cabinetry and the original enameled yellow tub, which I absolutely refused to lose. I then put down this honed Italian marble, which is probably a little bit more grand than I should have for a house like this, but it had just the right colors. Then we've got a map here. Let me show you where we are. So this is Door County. It is the peninsula on the state, and we are right here. So there's Ephraim, and Binkhaven is right there, across from the park. So let's back up a little bit here, and then we're going to go into the primary bedroom. Okay, so in here we have got another ceiling. This is a much more formal, what are these called? Shell-backed, or I'm not sure the exact name, but a much more formal style of rosemalling. And then I got a bigger bed in here. This room is really sized for a double, but I really wanted a queen bed in here. So I kind of finagled some things around to make it fit. But all the furniture is original in here, including this lovely mirror that was brought over from Norway. And then very interestingly, this baby hutch, again, another piece that was made for the house. But the rosemalling on here was actually done by Dean himself. I think this is one of the only examples of rosemalling I have by Dean. Dean was a great collector, but I'm not so sure he was a great painter. And I think he knew it too. But it is really fun to have a piece that he painted. Maybe one day I'll have to paint something myself. I've actually never rosemaled anything before. And then on top here, there's another Ethel piece in the back and a couple of trinkets. Okay, so I'm gonna take us back downstairs here, and then we're gonna pop outside and go and look at the stabors, which are, I don't know if you can see them through the windows, but they are over there.
Hi again. So before we look at the stabors, I want to just pause really quickly because the central body of the house, I didn't really explain it very well in my pre-recorded tour, but it's very interesting that the initial core was kind of this like mock stabor, but made with an American floor plan. So here we can kind of see how the floor plan is in its initial iteration. And it's a combination living, dining, kitchen in a small footprint cottage, which in 1961, this was like the height of modernism. But everyone else doing a floor plan like this would have been doing it with like Eames furniture and, you know, the mid-century modern, like most people would recognize it. So it's a great combination to see mid-century modern meeting Nordic revival all kind of coming together to make this. Here, can we go to the next slide here? So here's the main body. This is while it's under construction, but it kind of shows it better just because there's so many trees around. But you can kind of see how it's being framed out to quite literally be just a little American stabor, which is, I think, the most adorable foundation for what this cottage ended up becoming. And we can go on to the next. And then here's some of the original finished product photos. So this was right away in, I think, 1962, because you can see the front windows that are kind of made to mock the stabor. They had to replace the windows. The builder put in the wrong one for the first year. You can also see the bench sitting there in the front where the stoop is now as one of the original pieces of furniture made for the house. It's actually a replica of an old bench. We're going to look at it in just a minute. But I thought it was great to see it in its original iteration because now there's so many volumes that have been added to it, you kind of lose sight that it is in fact a stabor of its own. And then we can go on to, I think the second video is next. Or actually, yeah, let's pause for questions. Does anyone have any questions about the main house before we take a look at the stabors?
Kristen is asking in the chat, in the dining room, there looked like a Rosemaled plate that was blue and white. Do you remember who the artist of that one is?
I do. That is by Newt Anderson, I believe his name was. He was one of the teachers at the Vesterheim. I think he was the only teacher who taught rosemaling on porcelain. The porcelain itself was made by Porsgrund, and I think he designed a couple pieces of Porsgrund that were like made into production. But that piece in particular was actually hand painted by him, which is very cool.
Wonderful.
I think we'll wait and ask the other question at the end. So
Absolutely.
as you have other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and we will field them when it's most appropriate. And Elliot, I think you can continue on with this wonderful tour.
Perfect. So next we're gonna look at the stabors. This is only for a few minutes, and then we'll have a chat and look at some more things.
So coming back out here, we can look at the stabors. These are really the gems of the property. So the bigger one here was built in Telemark, Norway in 1967. And then they numbered the logs, took it apart and put it in a container to ship it here, where it was rebuilt in 1968. Same thing with the littler one, though that one was built in 1972 and is by a different carver. That is by Olav Solid. So they're both copies of Baroque buildings. And what is important and differentiates these from some of the other stabors here in the country is that they're built with the traditional method of joinery on the foundation, whereas a lot of the other ones are kind of just the stabor shape plopped on a more traditional modern foundation. This one has a grass roof. This grass roof is actually new. The original one rotted through, but it has had a grass roof for most of its life. So we're gonna climb into this one first. This is the green and pink room up there. And then we will go into this one, which is where we started the tour. So then inside the room, the walls are marbled. They're actually marbled by Sigmund's wife, who is depicted right here in this portrait. Sigmund painted this portrait of his wife at the Folk Museum in Oslo. And that is hanging above a trunk by Nils. What else do we have in here? Let's see. This little corner cabinet's by Betty Wagner. I don't think she was actually a gold medalist, but she had a shop in Illinois that she sold rosemaling from. The sofa here is an early Nordic revival piece by Rom Weber. I think this is actually as old as like the 1930s or 1940s. I don't entirely know how it ended up here, but it has been in this room for a very long time. A couple more pieces of rosemaling from some early gold medalists. Little prayer on the back of the door. And then let's climb up to what I think is the best room of them all. This is definitely one of the most well-liked rooms. So I'm going to kind of just stand here and pan around a little bit for a second. So this is the second floor of that bigger stabor. It is a green and pink color palette room. The built-in beds have this kind of like, let me pan down to it. This kind of like chinoiserie, Waldorf's style of rosemaling, and then on the beams along the beds, they were done in the Lasure technique, which is like a linseed oil with strips of oil paint in it. But yeah, there's a couple of beds here. I guess I will have to climb up here all the way. Sorry, these rooms are so small, it's hard to kind of like figure out how to record here. All right, so here is a cabinet that was made for the spot. Of course, it frames the window just perfectly, and then it was painted by Sigmund. Again, a really patient hand when he did that, which we just don't see from him very often. And then another little corner cabinet to match. Some more bits of rosemaling. That camera case there in the middle is another one by Nils. And then we have these beds that all the kids always fight over. This is, of course, a vacation rental nowadays. I rent out this building and the main house to help keep the restoration going along. And kids are always fighting over who gets to sleep in this room because they want to have their own cabin. Anyways, the table here, so this is the original dining table. This was a scaled down replica from the Folk Museum in Oslo. Dean would find records of these in old books and then just kind of copy them. This is one of those. And then the bench on its other side, that's identical to the coffee table in the living room. And then we have another Cuba stool. This one is by Sally DeRoos. And I think that's kind of, oh, of course, wait a minute, the ceiling. Let's climb on the floor here. Okay, so the ceiling. So this one is based off a really old ceiling, but it's really kind of modernized. I mean, this pink and green color palette, of course, is like a far departure from the historic. But then he added all of these delightful pearls throughout it to really create what I think of as kind of like the most modern interpretation of rosemaling that we see here at Binkhaven. And I think one of the most successful because it really, it's just so unique. I've never quite seen rosemaling like this, and I'm very happy to have it here. But yeah, that's kind of, that's what's going on in this room. To be honest, I wish I knew what else to tell you, but I will be available to answer any questions you may have. So this is the room and we'll chat about it. Now I'm going to climb on down. Okay, so coming into Burr, this is the last room we're going to look at. So we've got a couple of beds. They are actually full-size twin beds. They look really short, but they are not. I think I mentioned that the grass roof had to get replaced. And with that, we lost the original ceiling painted by Sigmund. But here, I can probably get a better view over here. Sally DeRoos so generously came back to paint this lovely rosemaling that we have, which frankly I think works much better than the original ceiling, which was a fairy tale theme. This kind of transitions from the busy wall into the ceiling much better, whereas the original was it was really kind of an overwhelming amount of rosemaling. We got another trunk by Sigmund there. And then this really cute built-in with a bookcase. And then this opens up to a set of blue drawers, which I think is adorable. On this shelf, we have a little plate from the 1939 World Fair. And this egg is really cute. This is a porcelain egg by Lois Leesney, Per Leesney's daughter-in-law. Really, my videography right now is not going to show the rosemalling very well. If you want to get a better image of this room, I would go on my website because you really have to have a wide-angle lens to get to kind of get the full effect of what's going on here, just with the shape of the room. Also, we've got one of these cute chairs. There used to be a bunch of these like awkward shaped chairs. This is the only one that is left here. It was made in 1961 and has the Primstov calendar on the back, which is really cute. Anyways, I'm going to wrap this up and then we can start chatting about it.
Okay, hello again. So I have a couple old photos of the Stabors. Here is the bigger of the two, the full-size Stabor, when it was first built, right after its very first coat of stain in 1970. Yeah, really cute. It's one of the only images I have, or only period images I have of the Stabor, but I think it is really lovely. And we can go on to the next one. The next one's more interesting. All right, so here is the original interior of Burr. This is actually when it was photographed in 1986 for House Beautiful. Binkhaven was an 8-page spread in the October issue. And this is one of those shots, and it happens to be one of the only good shots I have that features the ceiling. You can see on the top left corner, that's the princess. There's also a prince, and it kind of floated around with this really adorable fairy tale thing. But Sigmund always lamented that he never liked how this room turned out. I think because it was just kind of overwhelming, and I think he was rushed when he painted it. I heard that from Sally when she came to fix up the ceiling for us. But yeah, this is just that room. The fur on the beds, that was only for the photo for House Beautiful. It was never actually like that. I don't know why they decided to put fur on the bed. It is very Norwegian, but just something that didn't really happen here. And then do you want to go on to one more slide? Oh, actually, before we do that, I guess we should answer these couple of questions. I see the question from Elizabeth for heating. So the entire property is heated with electric baseboard heat, which is painful. It is ungodly expensive, and it actually only stays warm through the holidays, and then we close it down and it has to freeze because the roofs aren't quite engineered correctly, and the heating system just doesn't quite do the job. And then let me look at these other questions. The front balcony level of the house. So that was, most of that work was done between 1968 and 1970 or 69. I think all of that was done. Yeah, I guess actually all of that was done in 1969, except for that front stoop, which was 71. And treating the outside of the house, yes, we have. So the house actually hasn't been repainted since the early 90s. And that is what we're working on now. So the house got restained with, I actually switched from an oil-based stain to a water-based opaque stain from Benjamin Moore. It's much more almost plasticky, but the house is actually cedar, which is a soft wood. So the water-based stain protects it much better against UV and really just everything. It's much more of a hassle to restain it, which I'm sure I'm going to lament myself for in a decade, but it is better for the building. So we had to switch over to that. And the windows are being done right now, but each piece of glass needs to come out of the window and get put back in with new putty. And it's like, I did not realize what I was getting into when I decided to start redoing the windows, but someone's got to do it. And there was nobody to hire locally. So I am slowly chipping away at them. And then
Wonderful.
why don't do we want to switch to, actually, before we switch to talking about the furniture, does anyone have any other questions about the stabors specifically?
I feel like in the right now in the question, there's a question by Elizabeth, but I want to save that to the end because it's really about kind of your story coming to Binkhaven, which we want to hear too, but we'll wait till you finish the tours. And there's also questions about how do we come to stay there, so we'll wait till the end on that. And maybe, and also some of the flora around the area. So I think maybe just continue on with the furniture and then we'll get to all that nitty and gritty.
Perfect. Okay, so I thought part of what really made me love Binkhaven was that so much of the furniture was specially made for the house and painted for the house. Like I'd probably say about half of the furniture in the property was all custom made for it. But I thought I'd pick out a few of the more important pieces and kind of talk about those. So the very first one we're going to talk about is one of the first pieces that was made for the house, and that is the bench right here. The photo on the left is Sigmund, his wife, and daughter sitting on it just after they finished painting the stabor. And on the right, we have a young Marilyn and Dean. This is one of the only photos I have of them, and I just think it's adorable. They look so happy, and they enjoyed this house so much, and I think this photo really illustrates that. We can go on to the next one. So here is the bench today, or I guess last Tuesday when I took this photo. So the bench itself is actually a replica. So the early pieces of furniture, Dean had been to Norway a few times, and he had been to Sweden and kind of a few of the Scandinavian countries. And he had taken a lot of photos in those museums. And that's what he used as his initial inspiration for furniture. But what's interesting to see just in those very first few years, really like 1961 to about 1965, they went from relatively literal copies like this one is to much more adaptive copies or creative copies that were made to that were very inspired by historic examples, but made to fit the need that they had here at Binkhaven specifically. If we go to the next slide. So here's the original bench that this is copying. It's from the Amlid House in Setstill, now at the Nordic Folk Museum. I'm really sorry I couldn't find up-to-date photos of this for some reason. The black and white photo on the left is from Jill Stewart's folk art book published in the 1970s. And then this is an old postcard from the museum, but you can see the bench in the bottom left corner there. This room is described as being almost medieval. It is from the late 17th century, but it's very rural. So it has this open fireplace and a lot of the furniture is built in. But this was the
Elliot just froze. He told us there was a bad storm last night and he was having a little glitch with his internet. So I'm sure he'll come back in just a second if you just want to be patient.
The joys of Zoom are that we can be together from afar, but the downsides are sometimes a storm that hits one place affects other people. So
exactly. It's fun to see where. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the picture of this room just feels so reminiscent of some of the rooms at Vesterheim that are the recreations of the original houses. It's fascinating to look and see the built-in beds and how everything is happening in the same space.
Totally. And just, I think it's just so interesting, the history of all these names of folk artists that, we see in our collection or have taught at Vesterheim Folk Art School, and how they're represented in this amazing place in Binkhaven, which I did not say correctly in the beginning. I said it in a very Northeast Iowa, Midwestern, non-Norwegian speaking way. So I apologize for that. It's also been really fun to see where people are zooming in from today. So if you haven't put in the chat yet where you're coming from, please do. We told Elliot if his internet went awry, we would just continue the program and we would just get him back in here. So I hope you don't mind Andrew and I fodder back and forth here, but it's great to see where you're coming from.
Absolutely. I also would love to see in the chat, and I know you said this, Leah, but if anybody out there has had the chance to visit Binkhaven, we would love to hear about your stay there and what your favorite memories are there. But we would also love to know if you have stories about some of the folk artists and painters and carvers who he has featured so far. So if you have those memories, by all means, add them to the chat. But here he is, the one and only Elliot. Welcome
Hi,
back.
sorry about that. The
Not
downside of living in the very northern part of the state.
Storms
anyways,
are going to do that.
They do. I mean, we were just saying Door County has many great things, but convenient is not one of them. Anyways, back to the bench. I don't entirely know where I froze off here. But yeah,
you were saying that the room was sort of a medieval era room.
Yes, so it's actually a 17th century room, but it's a very rural part of Norway at the time. So you can see this open flue fireplace here in the middle. So it doesn't even have a fireplace quite yet. But Dean was really fascinated, particularly by these really old examples. So we see him copying this bench right here. But what's interesting is that he copied it kind of inverse. You can see how it is a raised like relief carving. He carved in the motif the same way he did a couple of the original architectural panels. And then we can go on to the next one here because we're gonna have to rush a little bit here. All right, so here is the Sawbuck table that is now in the top of Stabor, the original dining room table. So this was made, I think, 2 pieces after the bench was, but you can see here how it's getting a little bit more inventive. So it's still a pretty literal copy, but if we go to the next slide here. So here's the original. It's relatively plain. You can see on the very end cap here, there's no decorative motif, and the 1764, the year that is carved into it. It's just very, I wouldn't say crudely carved in, but it's very plain, simple carving, and then we can go into the next. Whereas here, it got a little bit more whimsical, which is something that kind of continued to happen. We got the little horse that got added in, and you can see the year, sorry, I had terrible lighting when I went to go and take these photos. But the year actually says 1762 because he made this in 1962. So we just thought it would be a cute reference of 200 years between the 2 tables. And then let's go on to the next one. So here it is in the original setting, and this is also before the house got painted.
Well,
so it looks like Elliot's internet may have frozen again, unfortunately.
I have to say, we've been doing this now for 18 months and we've had very little trouble. So we have to be grateful. Also, Elliot providing all of these pre-recorded videos makes it easy for us to kind of carry on. So maybe while Elliot comes back, Andrew, would you like to do your commercial about when our next enrollment is coming up?
I'd be happy to. If you are interested in learning about any of the things that we have gotten to see here, if you're interested in learning carving or learning rosemaling or anything like that, there's a whole slate of offerings, both in person and online through Vesterheim Folk Art School. Classes tend to fill up very fast for some of the highly sought after instructors and classes. So if you want to, you can mark your calendar now for November 10th at noon Central is when we will open enrollment for all of the classes in January, February, and March. We are really excited. We're going to have a Mitten Monday series that'll get you through the winter with warm hands. You'll get to learn from 3 incredible knitting instructors over the course of the 3 months and make 3 different pair of mittens. There are some wonderful rosemaling classes. Patty Goke just last week 2 weeks ago at this point, wrapped up a 4-day intensive where the rosemalers tackled a different style every day: Nordfjord, Viksdal, Setesdal, and Trondelag. And there was a waiting list to get in. People had a fabulous time. So we are offering a second session of that. So that will be a fun one. Leah, what other programs are you excited about that are coming up?
I mean, I'm excited that we're continuing to grow our Norwegian language programs. We're also continuing to offer fabulous Nordic cooking and cocktail programs. And then you'll see all the different folk art disciplines represented online. We're also open in person, and it's going really well, and feels like we're, fun to see people in 3 dimensions too again. So anyway, just keep checking back. And Elliot, you're back. Oh no, maybe I spoke too soon.
Elliot was briefly back. His face joined us for a smile.
There he is.
Oh, there he is. Excellent.
I'm afraid we have got a lot of wind right now, so the internet might be very spotty. But anyways, let's just dive right back in and we can blow through this real quick. Let's go to the slide after that interior shot. Do you want to go to the next one? All right, so so here's the desk in a little bit better detail. So this was made a few years later, I believe, 1964, 1965. But now we can see where he's taking these really it's a Swedish style, these longboard style of construction, but he's adding in the Binkhaven motif with the doll and the heart, which carries throughout the property. And then Sigmund painted this on his first trip in 1966 in what he called a Hallingdal style. I think it's really just delightful because it uses such an American color palette and incorporates the heart that he set out with a little bit of red. If we go into the next slide. Here he is sitting at the desk in his Nordic folk costume. I think this is the year he painted the Stabor, a few years after he had initially painted that desk. But it's a fun photo of him in his costume. And then can we go to the next? And then here are the other 2 pieces of furniture that match this particular motif. But I think the wall shelf is particularly fitting because the heart in the center is painted on now, which is something you just don't see in rosemaling. But I'm sure Dean probably asked Sigmund to incorporate the heart and doll, and that was what resulted from it. And we can go on to the last piece of furniture. So this is the last piece of furniture. I tried to get better detail shots of this. Unfortunately, I couldn't, but now we don't really have much time anyways. The coloring is much more like the image on the left. The image on the right was taken with a wide angle lens and gets a little flooded with color sometimes. Anyways, this was painted in 1968. I believe this was his 3rd or maybe even 4th trip over here. But he had a lot more time when he was painting these cabinets versus a lot of the other things. So we see a much more patient painting of these, and they come out really, really fabulous. I mean, there's a really wonderful attention to detail on these particular cabinets that, frankly, you don't see a lot of from Sigmund because he was such a spontaneous artist. He painted quite quickly. So let's dive into the questions because we only have 5 more minutes.
Great. We want to make sure we get Elizabeth's question in here because she had it typed in earlier. She says, Elliot, thank you for this tour. I've been following your Instagram account over the past year and a half or so. You've done a beautiful job with restoration. Do you have Nordic heritage, or what sparked your interest in Binkhaven?
So I am not even a little bit Norwegian. I am from this village. I summered in this tiny little town of Ephraim my entire life, and I love this village. I was here for a weekend. I was working in New York City, but my background before that was in art history. I have an art history degree from Vanderbilt. And through college, I worked with a decorative art dealer in Chicago that did a lot of really, really high-end decorative arts on like First Dibs and that kind of market. And I also worked at a auction house for a little while in their decorative art department. So I was really interested in decorative arts. And when I saw this house in original condition with all of these custom furnishings and everything just here like a little time capsule from the 1970s, I was just like, oh, drop what I'm doing. Let's do some Nordic revival. And I literally just dove in from there and took it all the way. And I kind of like, my biggest focus was taking out the American things that kind of cluttered up the interior. and I replaced it with all either things from Dean's collection, because he actually had another Rosemaled home that has unfortunately been abandoned. But a lot of those decorative arts made their way here. And then anything that I had holes in the collection, I would fill with either period correct rosemaling from either here or Norway, mainly from the Vesterheim circles. So it really can be just wholeheartedly like the Rosemaled house, which is what it was always meant to be. And I love the extreme, and this is very much the extreme.
Awesome. Do we have, Karen is wondering if you ever visited Norway.
You know, I haven't. I was set to go, and then the pandemic has stood in the way. I am sure I will go very soon. I only bought this a year before COVID, and I was gonna go that spring, but of course, plans change. So I will go very soon. It'll be my next trip, no doubt.
Wonderful. Well, before we wrap things up, can you talk a little bit about how folks can come and visit Binkhaven, live and in the flesh if they want to be able to see the pieces in more detail?
Yes, totally. So it's a vacation rental now. I book really far out. I'm one of the most popular vacation cabins here, and we've got a thriving tourist economy, especially post-COVID. We really can't meet our demand locally. I released the calendar quite late, so it'll get opened up in November. And it really pays to book early because all of the popular weekends will be gone. Literally in the first like 10 days, I open up that calendar, every popular weekend will be booked. Especially if you want those like key fall weekends or like the peak summer weekends, which are fabulous and well worth coming for. Just got to plan ahead. But if you keep an eye on my Instagram, or if you send me an email on my website, I can add you to my like little email listserv. I send one email a year, and it's when the calendar gets released, and then everyone rushes to the gate to get their weekend.
That's so great.
Mhm.
Well,
There was a question that had come in the chat about the flora that's around the cabin. It didn't come through the Q&A, but it was asking like, are there forget-me-nots? Are like, what's the plant life like where you
So
are?
this piece of land was bought because it resembles Stavanger, Norway. They actually ended up here in Ephraim because they had gone around Lake Michigan traveling to find a place for a cottage. And when they got here, they went fishing down in the bay, and we've got these really big bluffs. They're part of the Niagara escarpment and part of the fossils that I go hunting for. But it looked a lot like the fjords, and they were just like, oh, well, this is where we have to go. But they couldn't find any bluff side property that was big enough because they wanted it to be really kind of secluded. So they found this property, which wasn't for sale at the time, bought it, and then it was actually landscaped extensively in the 1970s with apple trees. There's about 6 acres of a pine tree field, and then the forest is all second growth, planted with ferns, sedges. There's a lot of trilliums. We do have forget-me-nots. They're invasive, so I try to get rid of them. And there's a couple other invasives that have gotten in. The landscape was literally abandoned. I mean, like, I think Dean had planted so much because we've got 13 acres here that he realized it was too much to take care of. And then he just said, oh, we don't need to do this. And every apple tree has been unpruned for now 50 years. So they're not the prettiest apple trees, but they're very large and they do flower quite brilliantly. They're all ornamentals. So we're rehabbing that now. It'll take decades to unclear or to clear out the landscape.
Before Andrew, you wrap this up, I just want to ask Elliot, when do you open back up? Like, what are your seasonal dates for having visitors at Binkhaven?
It changes a little bit year to year, depending on what work I have to get done and where I have to fit contractors in. Next year, I'll be opening a little earlier than usual, which should be like mid-April. I really just closed those like really cold months because I can risk an ice dam with the way that the lofted living room is set up. The roof has a little bit of an engineering fault that has yet to be fixed. Having murals underneath the roof can really make it quite tricky to fix the roof.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Elliot, for sharing this incredible property with us. And thanks to all of you for attending today. We also want to thank our collections, exhibitions, development, accounting, and communications and marketing teams for all they do to help make this possible behind the scenes.